Jewish-American activist and poet Muriel Rukeyser famously opined, "The universe is not made of atoms, it is made of stories." This statement, though cosmically inaccurate, is most certainly true of our human universe. If you will, imagine that each of us is a star, and every story we tell is a bit of light we send far out into the blackness as a beacon announcing, "I am here. This is what I've lived." This moment we've entered, memory and meaning, the stories we tell about ourselves, as the rabbi said, began months ago, when members of this community gathered for a workshop titled From Ponder to Page. In this workshop, participants were led through a process of story writing. Some of the participants had written stories before, others had not written any at all. But by the end of the workshop, all of them not only had a story to tell, but had committed it to paper. However, stories don't live on paper. They may be written there, but they live in the person who lived the story. And when that story is gifted to us, if we allow it, will also become part of our living as well. In 5 brief chapters, you will see and hear members of Larchmont community here at this temple share some of the memories which have helped shape them and have given their lives meaning. Some of these memories are of much needed advice. Some are of humorous incidents. Others recount trials and tribulations. The stories are at turns touching, inspiring, sometimes tinged with levity or shot through with shocking. Some are very vulnerable. All are very valuable in how they give just a glimpse into the depth of this community's humanness. Ladies and gentlemen, memory and meaning, the stories we tell about ourselves.
I remember when I came to the United States the first time.
My daughter was going through a tough period of time when she was in middle school.
I remember on May 5th, 1968, delivering my first daughter, Rachel.
We were totally jet lagged. I had just come off my first flight in business. I was 18 with my grandparents.
I remember and can hear Sophie Alice's raspy 2.5-year-old voice.
I remember when I first came to Barnard College as a freshman, how excited I was to leave Kansas City and start my new life as a student here in New York City.
I met an angel that turned me away.
Decisions, choices. We all have to make them. Sometimes these are as mundane as to whether or not to have a shot of hazelnut in our cappuccino, or if farfalla will make for a good enough evening meal. Often when we have to choose between options, we find ourselves confronted with too profound a lack of information to choose appropriately. And sometimes the choice we should make is as clear as two roads diverging in a wood. And we know that whichever one we choose will make all the difference. Chapter 1, good choice, bad choice.
I was in a hospital in intensive care. I couldn't talk, and I couldn't move on part of my face, and ended up I had swelling of my brain. My husband was there all the time, and would hold a photo of all the children on one side of me for me to see. And when I saw the angel that day, he was on one side, and I think it was a woman, a beautiful woman in a light, and so lovely, so wonderful, so inviting, so easy, and just being like, I don't know, maybe not. No, I don't think so. You know, you look good, but I don't think that's for me. I think this is for me.
We are walking to our first dinner on the trip of a lifetime. It was the first time I'd left the country, and I was overjoyed to be going to the place that my grandparents loved so much. They spent so much time in France over the years, so they brought me to Paris, the city of lights. So we get to our first restaurant, and I'm feeling very grateful, out of my element. I don't speak French, but they hand me the menu and there's some English on it. So very relieved. And I see on the menu sweet breads, and I'm thinking, teenage logic, they're not gonna call it French toast in France. So I order sweetbreads for dinner. I'm very proud of myself. I feel like I've really nailed it. And the meal comes, no one says anything, and in front of me is a plate that doesn't look like any French toast I've ever seen before. I cut my first bite, and I eat it. It is not French toast. Nobody says anything, and I do my very best to hide the fact that what is in my mouth is of no appeal to me. I put my fork and my knife down, and defeated, I look at my papa, and he has this devilish grin on his face, because he knows exactly what has just gone down. And he says, "Cuckoo, do you think you know what you've eaten?" Yeah, that was brains.
Though our first chapter was about making choices, we know there are lots of situations in which we have no choice at all. German philosopher Martin Heidegger said that we human beings experience a condition he termed as thrownness. The idea that upon being born, we are flung into a world in which the conditions are already set, the laws have already been passed without our permission or consent, and we just have to find a way to deal with this as best we can. Into this world we're thrown like a dog without a bone, as the Doors put it in Riders of the Storm. For this reason, we need others in our lives, those who've also been thrown into this tempest of a world, others who will help us weather the difficulties, frustrations, and sufferings that too often come with the human condition. Chapter 2, family, friends, mentors, and kin, or I'll be there for you.
The most important thing that ever happened to me in my life was meeting and marrying my husband. It's going to be 68 years. And we've had 3 children, we have 4 grandchildren. Everybody's all grown, including my baby grandchild who's 25. So they've turned out incredibly beautiful. It was what was so special for me to see my children as parents, because they've done a great job. And of course, we're very, very proud of them.
I remember my friend Peggy, my soulmate. We met during a workshop and instantly connected. She divorced, moved to a mountain in Margarettsville, And I went to visit her often. We would go into her studio, we'd paint together, we'd walk her dog. What she gave me was accepting myself for who I was. She never said, Susan, you don't do this, you don't do that. It was, how wonderful you do this, and it's how wonderful you do that.
I had a very good year in college at the time. My dad said, you know, whatever you want, I'll pay. And so I said, you know, I want to go to the US. And so he bought me a ticket to San Francisco. I was living on campus, but on the weekend I was going home to get my laundry done and that kind of stuff, and then commuting back to the town, the college town. And the train I was taking was sometime a local train and sometime an international train. So I'm waiting there on the platform one day in Brussels, and this train is going to, I don't know, Frankfurt or something like that, through, you know, outside Belgium. But it stops in the town where I was studying, and this guy approaches me. And we start a conversation right there on the platform. We get on the train together. He's from San Francisco, and his name was John Weston. I'll tell you how well I remember this. And so, you know, the train to my town was right. It was maybe 30 minutes or something like that. But by that time, I have a phone number and all that stuff. And so I you know, invited me to go to San Francisco, and that's how I had somebody. And so he was waiting for me there, and you know, we stayed friends all, you know, all these years and stuff. So
We always want what's best for our children. And thank God I can say now that she has moved past that, and she's amazing, and she's gorgeous, and the accolades I get from people who meet her, she really touches people when she meets them. She's that incredibly special. But oof, that was a time that thank God it's behind us, and I'm just very thankful that that was just a phase in life. And when people ask me about difficult times, and I definitely think of that, and they go through difficult times as well. That's why I do think it's important to talk about it, because other people definitely feel the same way, especially I think with children in middle school and girls and going through hormones. I always like to say it's a phase, and I hope that if anybody is going through this, that their kids come out on the other side.
From the Latin prefix re, meaning back, and the Latin verb salire, meaning to jump or spring, we derive the word resilience, meaning to spring back. Originally, resilience was exclusively a scientific term referring to materials that have an ability to return to their original shape after being compressed or stretched. Now, resilience denotes one of humanity's most admirable attributes. And when we ascribe that attribute to an individual or a community that has been stretched or compressed by malicious forces, we don't typically mean they've returned to their original shape. We often mean that they've somehow been both made stronger and wiser after having gone through the ordeal. And often, putting words to that hard-earned strength and hard-won wisdom can pay forward across generations. Chapter 3, Resilience, the Window and the Chimney.
My father, who is deceased 30 years, has always been an inspiration to me. When he was 8 years old, he came to this country as an immigrant child from Poland, where his father had been killed by an anti-Semite. He arrived penniless on the Lower East Side with a mother who was a bilateral below-knee amputee in a wheelchair and 3 older sisters. He started selling apples on the Lower East Side to support his family. He was a bright man, but was unable to get an education because the realities of life were such that it required him to earn a living to support his family. The obstacles that he encountered in his life made him much stronger to deal with what was in front of him, and he passed that on to his children. When I applied to medical school at Columbia, they told me, quote, "We don't take many of your kind." I never thought I'd get in. What's interesting about this is that I came out, I had tears in my eyes, and I remember distinctly, he said to me almost verbatim, "When they close the door, go through the window, go through the back door, go through the chimney." No doesn't mean no. It only means no if you accept the decisions that have been foisted upon you through no fault of your own.
Sometimes in life, you just get it wrong. Perhaps we see a scene and interpret it according to our ideal, what we'd like it to be. There are also times when we get it wrong because we got the wrong idea from others, perhaps parents or grandparents who also got it wrong. Very wrong. What happens when we discover reality is different than we were taught to expect? Sometimes this discovery can have the potential to make us laugh at our own erroneous assumptions. Sometimes the realization of our own palpable, mortifying ignorance may offer the potential for learning, growth, and challenging of perceptions. Chapter 4, Lost in Translation and Wrong Expectations.
One of the memories that I have of my grandmother Baba is that I was in my kitchen, about 9 years old, and she was baking something, lentil bread or something like that. And she was talking to me, she spoke Spanish to me, and as much as I understood almost everything she said, sometimes she just like mumbled to herself, and she was just going. In the meantime, I just remember just sitting here, seeing her, and she had like this sweet face, like a little doll, and her little chubby hands, and she was rolling out her dough and kneading the bread. And I just remember just sitting there, and she was so short that she would stand on a little stool in the kitchen so that she could reach, you know, and she'd be more comfortable. And my mother was at the other end of the kitchen, and she was looking at us, and I just think I glanced at my mom or something. I don't know. I just remember her being there, and then our housekeeper was coming downstairs, and her name was Margaret. Margaret just stops there and looks at my mom, and my mom looks at her, and Margaret goes, "Isn't that just beautiful? Just, you know, a granddaughter and a grandmother just having a moment together in the kitchen baking something." And my mother looks at Margaret and says, "If only you knew what she was saying. Why am I doing this? I constantly, every time I come to this country, I'm always in the kitchen baking. Everything hurts. If I stand any longer, my ankles are gonna swell up."
I remember it was the summer after 5th grade. We were 10 years old, and several of my friends and I decided that we would go to a YWCA camp for a week in southern Missouri. None of us had ever been away from home for any length of time, so we were very excited to do this, but also a little anxious. The day we were to leave, it was a hot summer day, sticky, hot, air very thick, maybe as thick as our feelings at the moment. We got on the bus, and it was a very long 6-hour bus ride to finally get to this camp. When we got there, we were very tired, pretty drained from the trip, got to our bunk, and no sooner had I thrown my duffel on the bunk than across from the narrow bunk, the other side of the bunk, came 2 girls. Each positioned themselves on either side of me. I stood very still, very anxious about what was going to happen next. While I was standing still, one, actually both, reached over my head, reached into my skull, beneath my red braids, and one looked at the other after they had rubbed around a while and said, "There aren't any horns." And the other one said, "Yes, and her hair isn't black either." At this point, I didn't know what to think when my 2 good friends came to my aid and said, "Yes, she's Jewish, and she's our good friend."
Now again, we return to the wisdom of Muriel Rukeyser. In her poem, Islands, Rukeyser observes a group of bathers looking out at a body of water towards some islands. The bathers believe the islands to be separate. But no, Rukeyser wisely cautions, for God's sake, they're all connected underneath. All connected underneath. She is saying that if the bathers would just dive a little deeper beneath the waves, they'd realize that the notion of the islands as being separate is an illusion, as they are both connected by the earth beneath and the water between them. But too, so are the bathers, except they don't realize it. Like those bathers, we too often feel we are separate. However, sometimes we are visited by the unexpected and receive a kind of grace, a grace that brings us into a moment in which we are given a glimpse underneath and beyond this illusion. And we realize that we are part of a wonderful oneness. Chapter 5, Unexpected Connections, or you felt it too?
I remember the first time I went to the biennial, the big semi-annual gathering of Reform Judaism, 6,000 Jews sitting all together. I don't remember where we were, but I remember when the Shema started, and it was like the loudest booming Shema I'd ever heard. And I still get chills when I close my eyes and picture that. It's almost like God's oneness is reverberating, and we can feel it. And even though we're so different, in that moment, people from Texas and people from Florida and folks from New York and folks from around the world all singing together, we were somehow united as one.
Now, far be it from me to wax religiously in a house of worship. But I wonder if through the journey of your life, have you ever gotten the feeling that you're being guided? That there has been some hand leading you towards some destiny? Yeah, me neither. Just kidding. I definitely have had that feeling. But whether you have had that experience or not, I'm sure that even the most atheistic among us have to admit that life doesn't seem to be completely haphazard, random, and plotless either, does it? I mean, each action, interaction, person met, choice made or not made has led us all here to this moment where we can be with the miracle of community and receive the gift of story, memory, and meaning, the stories we tell about ourselves. Maybe these stories are not only about the people who've lived them and told them. Perhaps one of these tales triggered in you a memory, one that is rife with meaning and now needs word and voice to allow it to radiate from you and become just a bit of starlight that might travel through someone's darkness and illuminate their path. Perhaps a path that leads them to a space in which they find an invisible yet familiar presence, one that will whisper in their ear, touch them on the shoulder, and gives a bit of guidance when needed. I suspect this has happened to more than a couple of us here. And when it happens a few times in your life at the right time, like possibly today, it's enough to make you wonder if perhaps you may have been just a little bit blessed.
We've been thrown curveballs, like my husband lost his job. We had to move. My son had debilitating problems, things that life throws you, and we've been able to deal with them and work through them and and it brought us closer together.
I feel blessed to have had him in my life, and I also feel an obligation, a profound obligation, to pass this on to my children and to my grandchildren.
That lesson from my grandfather to try anything once is one that has taken me through week after week for just my lifetime.
She's finishing at the high school with an honors, and she's, like I said, she spends a lot of time with the rabbi, and he only has the most wonderful things to say about her, and most people that meet her would say the same. She's a very special girl.
Here's a whole city that changes its traffic pattern. For Shmini Atzeret, this is really the place I'm going to have a wonderful time.
I felt that this was where I belonged. And so after a couple of years of talking to Rabbi Sermon, I decided to convert. And so now I describe myself as an American Jew. And that's my path into this.
Friends, we invite you now to lean in on what this residency has been all about, which is, these are the stories that make us, and each one of us is such a trove of tales and stories, and they're ongoing. They don't stop. Even after we stop, they don't stop. So, with the principle that story often invites and begets stories, we would like to take a few moments for you to share some of your stories with one another. So just turn to the people next to you, find yourself in groups of 5 or 6, and I would like to invite you, please, to think about a person who has shaped you. Preferably in a positive way, but we can open the door in many other ways. There are lots of lessons to be learned, but think about a person, especially a person who loved you. And by love, I have a specific definition. I mean the commitment to make each other as healthy and as whole. Healthy with a capital H. Think about a person who has loved you, who has made you what you are. Take 60 seconds or 90 seconds to share that in groups of 5 or 6. Share a little bit about that person and perhaps a little bit about the way that you were shaped or transformed by that person. Very short, so you're not going to have a lot of time. 60 seconds in groups of 5. Go.
Life is a menagerie of stories where there's a single human weaving. What Guy Mendilow did, along with the amazing Regie Gibson, was create the weaving that fit us perfectly. We were here together with our friends from the Black Pentecostal Church, the Straight Gate Church and Larchmont Temple, and we've been sharing stories for the past many years, but this moment, which brought our stories to life, was absolutely transformational. I couldn't imagine a more beautiful, poignant, precious, high-impact way to share than through Guy Mendilow's music and these amazingly talented musicians and the unreal narration of Regie Gibson. They brought this to life in a way that is a gift and has touched every heart, every spirit that was here.
It's my first time hearing this group. I had no idea what to expect, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't know Landino, but it didn't make a difference because it was so joyous. Even in the parts that I knew were sad, it was still just beautifully done. And the variety of sounds and textures that were made from the various performers were just wonderful.
What an extraordinary experience to be included as a piece of art, part of music, part of story, to weave my own story into everyone's experience, and then know that that inspired us all to turn to our neighbor, someone we didn't know, and share so personally and so deeply. Just honored to be a part of it, and a truly extraordinary experience.